64 years ago, a 2-year-old girl vanished right in front of her home in Connecticut, disappearing without a trace, leaving a family plunged into grief and a community haunted for decades. Authorities suspected a cream-colored Bel Air and a strange woman seen in the neighborhood that day, but with no body found, no clear evidence, and too few leads to follow, the investigation quickly stalled. Yet throughout all those years, a desperate mother never gave up hope, clinging to the slim chance that her daughter was still alive somewhere. Then one day, when modern DNA analysis was applied to what seemed like an ordinary case file, a crucial detail overlooked for decades suddenly emerged, upending the entire case and shocking everyone involved in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In the fall of 1961, the northern New Haven neighborhood in Connecticut had the typical look of an expanding middle-class American suburb. Pale-painted wooden houses lined up along quiet streets, neatly trimmed front lawns, and children playing outside without constant adult supervision because community safety was almost taken for granted. The Cooper family, living at the end of the row on Wharton Street, consisted of 3 people: Martin Cooper, a worker at the Pratt & Whitney factory; Helen Cooper, a librarian at Yale, New Haven; and their daughter Emma Cooper, a 2-year-old girl with soft curly brown hair, who loved to smile and often carried her red tricycle, even if she was only moving a few meters around the porch. That day's routine was calm. Martin was fixing a storage shelf in the garage, Helen was hanging laundry outside, and Emma was playing near the edge of the lawn, sometimes running, sometimes stopping to pick up fallen leaves. From across the street, the neighbor Miss Doyle, who had lived in the area longer than the Coopers, often stood leaning by her kitchen window watching their front yard, both out of habit and as a subtle way of keeping an eye on a young family with a small child. For many months, life around here had been largely uneventful, but that particular afternoon featured a few details that caught the attention of the observant: a cream-colored Chevy Bel Air driving slower than usual as it passed through the neighborhood, then returning for a second time that same afternoon; a stranger walking along the sidewalk, stopping for quite a while directly across from the Cooper house before turning into a side street. Helen briefly noticed this unusual repetition, but seeing no direct threat, continued her chores. When taking Emma out to the front yard to play more, Helen kept her habit of always keeping the child in sight, though she occasionally had to turn back into the house for small items. In the exact moment she looked away for less than 2 minutes, when she returned, Helen no longer saw Emma in her spot. The red tricycle was tilted toward the edge of the yard, and Emma's small shadow had vanished from the lawn that was only a few steps from the front door. Helen panicked, ran around the yard calling her name, then rushed to Mrs. Doyle's house to ask. Martin heard the commotion and hurried out to the street, looking around, trying to find any sign of the child. Nearby neighbors also poured out onto the street, splitting up to run in different directions, checking behind garages, under cars, along fence lines, anywhere a 2-year-old might get stuck, but no one found a trace. The initial worry quickly turned to panic as minutes passed without progress, making both parents realize this was no longer just a case of a child wandering off. With no way to handle it themselves, Helen went inside, her hands shaking as she picked up the phone and reported that Emma had disappeared. Helen's call was immediately transferred to the New Haven Police Department's dispatch center, where the operator quickly determined this was not a typical case of a child leaving home on their own or getting lost. Emma's age of 2, and the fact that she vanished completely from the yard area in just minutes led to the incident being classified as a high-risk missing person case right away. The dispatcher escalated the internal alert to urgent priority and requested the nearest patrol unit to head immediately to the Wharton Street address. While units approached the scene, initial descriptions of Emma, the time she was last seen, and the circumstances were compiled and broadcast across the communication system to all active patrols within a several-mile radius. When the first patrol car arrived, the two officers quickly assessed the front yard, checked the porch corners, the curb area, and took initial statements from Helen, Martin, and Mrs. Doyle, the time Emma was playing outside, the duration Helen looked away, the car door sound Mrs. Doyle heard, and the unusual appearance of the cream-colored car that afternoon. After confirming no one in the area saw Emma leave the street on foot, and ruling out the possibility of her moving far on her own, the unit commander immediately set up a 3-block perimeter blockade around the Cooper home and asked residents to limit movement to avoid disturbing any remaining evidence. Once the blockade was stabilized and patrol units were positioned at checkpoints, the crime scene team was deployed with the first task, determining Emma's last known location and reconstructing the sequence of events in the few critical minutes that explained the child's disappearance. The initial focus was the Cooper front yard, where Emma's red tricycle was tilted to one side from its usual position. According to Helen, Emma always played near the lawn edge, and the tricycle was typically placed in the middle for easy access. So its diagonal position near the driveway entrance was noted by officers as a significant displaced object, possibly indicating a sudden movement. At the lawn edge bordering the curb, an officer observed 2 small parallel impressions in the soft soil, believed to be a child's footprints. The size and stride matched a roughly 2-year-old, confirming Emma had walked to the curb. However, beyond that point, the footprints stopped due to the hard concrete surface, forcing police to rely on other signs for direction. A few dozen centimeters from the footprints, they discovered a faint parallel indentation on the ground, resembling a slow-rolling tire mark, though not yet confirmed as from the cream-colored Bel Air. The shape and shallow depth suggested a vehicle had stopped or rolled slowly at the curb near the time of Emma's disappearance. Officers marked this area and used a tape measure to record the track widths for comparison with common vehicles in early 1960s Connecticut. Continuing the ground search, another item caught attention. Emma's green rubber ball, which she usually carried while playing, was found a short distance from the last footprint, tilted toward the sidewalk rather than in the lawn, as was her habit. The fact that both of Emma's items were displaced from their normal play areas suggested the child was moved from the yard by external force rather than leaving voluntarily. Based on the tricycle position, rubber ball, footprints, and tire marks, the forensics team began reconstructing the 10-minute timeline before Emma vanished. According to Helen's statement, Emma was near the lawn edge when she went inside. At that time, Martin was still in the garage and not directly observing. Miss Doyle, from her window, saw Emma a few minutes before hearing a car door close, a timing that matched when Helen said she stepped out of the kitchen. From these details, investigators determined Emma most likely walked to the curb while Helen was away. The ball may have fallen from her hand during a sudden impact, and the tricycle was pushed aside by a hurried force, possibly from an adult lifting Emma while she was still holding the handlebars. Officers also evaluated the possibility of Emma walking to the street herself or accidentally running elsewhere, but immediately ruled it out due to no continuing footprints. No items dropped alongside paths, and no witnesses seeing her move independently from the yard. Cross-referencing the footprint timing, item positions, and witness statements, police concluded Emma was removed from the yard toward the curb in under 2 minutes. The scene evidence aligned with the hypothesis that a motorized vehicle stopped near the curb, approached Emma in the brief moment Helen was not watching, then left before adults returned to the yard. The absence of struggle signs, no cries heard, or scattered items indicated the child was carried away so quickly she had no chance to react. The crime scene conclusion ruled out almost entirely the possibility of Emma leaving the area on her own, and strongly supported the theory of a targeted abduction, with the approach timed precisely to the moment the family was off guard. Immediately after completing the initial evidence collection in the Cooper front yard, the scene commander ordered the search expanded to the entire residential area within a 1-mile radius, starting with a sweep of every house inside the blockade perimeter. Officers knocked on each door, asking homeowners to immediately check backyards, garages, storage areas, and any spaces where a 2-year-old might accidentally get trapped. Old garages, low overhangs, wooden sheds, and long unused storage spots were all illuminated and searched with high-powered flashlights. Some residents proactively helped, opening garages and carports in advance for easy access. Every parked car along the street was checked, and even trash bins behind houses were inspected to rule out Emma hiding in obscured spots adults might miss. After completing the first residential layer, forces were divided into 3 groups for sweeping surrounding natural areas. The first group entered the edge of Edgewood Park Forest, with many trails and dense brush that could block visibility. Forest searching followed a linear pattern, officers spaced evenly, moving synchronously east to west to ensure no area was missed. In complex terrain, they tightened formation to check large bushes, tree root hollows, and thick leaf piles that could conceal small objects. The second group covered the Quinnipiac riverbank, sweeping from near Townsend Road southward. There, they checked rocks, muddy banks, and shaded tree areas. A small rescue boat was deployed to scan shallow water near shore, using spotlights to rule out Emma reaching the river and slipping. The third group was tasked with underground drains and stormwater systems. This was hazardous as manhole covers were scattered along intersections. Rescue teams used specialized hooks to lift each cover, lowered lights for inspection, and used gas detectors for safety before anyone entered. Though pipes were narrow and hard to access, no signs indicated Emma had entered. As the search radius expanded, the scene commander called in additional city rescue personnel to speed up before full darkness. Temporary command post was set up at the corner of Wharton and Maple for coordination. Area maps were spread on folding tables, marked with chalk for searched and pending zones. Search speed was divided into 3 phases: residential, Forest River, and infrastructure. Each phase noted start and end times to ensure completeness. When teams reported back, all results pointed to the same conclusion: no evidence Emma walked out of the yard, no items or signs of solo movement along roads, and no witnesses seeing her outside the yard after disappearance. Notably, in forest and river sweeps, no new small footprints on soft ground, no light object impressions, and no cries or survival signs. In residential areas, no family found Emma in backyards or garages, and none of her familiar items appeared in public spaces. This reinforced that Emma did not leave via foot or run to forest, park, or river areas. All collected data matched initial scene assessment: a 2-year-old vanishing completely in minutes without natural movement traces was nearly impossible without external intervention. As search teams continued expanding sweeps in natural and adjacent residential areas, the witness investigation team moved to the next step, collecting statements within 3 blocks of the Cooper home to pinpoint what residents saw from 1 hour before to 10 minutes after Emma's disappearance. They divided the area into small segments, knocking on doors and asking those present at the time for information on any unusual movements, vehicles, or individuals in the street that afternoon. Compiling statements quickly revealed many in the area noticed the cream-colored Chevy Bel Air appearing at least twice that afternoon. But no one thought it suspicious until Emma went missing. One resident in the northern block said they saw the car slowly pass the Wharton intersection about half an hour before Emma was reported missing. Another in the western block said the car stopped briefly midway down the row as if the driver was looking for an address, then drove on. This was entered as evidence of repeated suspicious vehicle presence in a tight radius on the exact afternoon. Besides vehicle reports, another group of witnesses confirmed a strange woman standing near the Cooper gate early afternoon. The mail carrier said he saw a woman in a light-colored coat standing close to the Cooper fence, looking into the yard for seconds before he continued. Another neighbor 2 houses away said she saw a similar woman turn into a side street and disappear. No one in the 3 blocks recognized her as from any local family, and descriptions were limited to average build, light clothing, and briefly observing the Cooper house. When compiling all statements, investigators analyzed reliability based on observation position, description, overlap, and timing. Witnesses seeing the slow Bel Air had observations spaced no more than 40 minutes apart, fitting Helen's noted unusual vehicle timing. The woman near the gate was confirmed by at least 2 independent sources from different viewpoints, increasing credibility. Investigators created a compiled timeline. Around 12:50, mail carrier sees strange woman. Around 13:15, Northern Block resident sees Bel Air first pass. Around 14:10, Western Block resident sees car brief stop. Around 14:20, Mrs. Doyle sees Emma in yard last time. Around 14:22, hears car door close. Around 14:23, 14:24, Helen returns to yard and discovers Emma missing. Placing timelines together, investigators noted significant overlap between vehicle woman appearances and Emma's disappearance window. However, they also analyzed potential memory errors, especially subjective time estimates not recorded in real time. Thus, no absolute conclusions, but details treated as viable leads. From compiled data, investigators created suspect lists in 2 main groups: vehicle-related, focusing on tracing cream-colored Bel Air owners within miles, especially those traveling Wharton area that afternoon; and strange woman, verifying new residents, relatives or visitors in nearby families, or anyone passing at witness times. Lists prioritized by access likelihood in the Helen away to disappearance window, with initial analysis showing the cream-colored Bel Air and strange woman as unexcludable factors. Though no direct evidence of involvement, their repeated proximity to the incident made them the focus of the next investigation phase. In parallel with expanding these 2 leads, the investigation team began reviewing all the initial processing steps to determine whether any errors during the golden hour had negatively impacted the progress of the investigation. And this very review process revealed several significant shortcomings. The first error involved the physical evidence at the roadside. Faint tire tracks were discovered, but not sealed or protected in time. Due to the busy neighborhood with heavy foot traffic, some residents, and even rescue personnel, moving near the roadside, caused the already faint and shallow marks to be displaced, making subsequent measurements only referential rather than sufficiently accurate for comparison with specific vehicle types. Within the Cooper yard, a small piece of fabric caught on the metal ledge of the fence was also overlooked because no one was certain it was related, and by the time the forensics team returned to check, it was no longer in its original position, possibly blown away by the wind or accidentally touched. The loss of this potential evidence that could have contained fiber traces or lingering scents eliminated an important avenue of analysis. Additionally, a small indentation in the soil near the fence, possibly made by an adult shoe heel, was not measured at the time of discovery because the responsible officer prioritized canvassing the neighborhood and planned to document it later. By the time they returned, the indentation had been blurred by the footsteps of search personnel. These pieces of evidence, if collected promptly, could have helped determine weight, speed of movement, or even the type of footwear worn by the person who approached Emma at the time of the incident. Beyond physical evidence, the handling of witness statements also revealed considerable limitations. One resident from the southern block reported hearing a brief child's cry around the same time as Emma's disappearance, but this information was only provided nearly an hour after the incident because the person thought the cry might have come from a neighbor's child. By the time the investigation team arrived to interview them, the memory of the cry's direction was no longer clear enough to be useful. Another witness reported seeing a woman in light-colored clothing standing near the Cooper gate about an hour earlier than the time reported by the mail carrier, but since this person left the area just before police sealed it off, patrol officers did not record their statement during the optimal time frame. These delays caused the collected timelines to be inconsistent, making it difficult to reconstruct the sequence of the strange woman's appearances and the suspicious vehicle. In an overall assessment of these limitations, the investigation team also had to confront the reality that technical capabilities in 1961 did not allow for processing the crime scene with the sophistication of later methods. There was no system for analyzing microscopic traces, no DNA collection capability, no tire track scanners, and scene photography relied on traditional film cameras, limiting the number of images and preventing documentation of every angle. The search teams, despite their field experience, lacked positioning devices or thermal scanners to sweep natural areas quickly and accurately, resulting in manual searches in linear formations that relied entirely on visual observation and low-powered flashlights. In that context, decisions prioritizing rapid searches over sealing and collecting all evidence inadvertently led to the loss of some initial data that, if preserved intact, could have been linked to witnesses or suspects. When synthesizing these factors, the investigation team had to acknowledge that errors in the early stage had become a direct cause of the lack of core data needed to identify the vehicle, direction of movement, or clear characteristics of the person who approached Emma. The initial focus on Delaney also diverted resources, as part of the team had to spend time inspecting his vehicle, home, and taking his statement, instead of continuing broad searches, or immediately focusing on the cream-colored Bel Air traces. Additionally, his criminal history led police to prioritize him over other leads, resulting in some clues not being fully processed during the critical period. Although the team knew eliminating Delaney was necessary to avoid pursuing a wrong direction, they also had to admit that the time spent checking him contributed to the ineffective use of the first investigative hours, which had high potential for determining the abductor's direction. Once Delaney was officially removed from the suspect list, the investigation returned to square one, forcing police to continue relying on the scant fragments of evidence and partially inconsistent witness statements to determine the next steps. After eliminating Delaney from the suspect list and finding no other individuals in the neighborhood who met the timing and vehicle criteria for the abduction, the investigation team decided to broaden their reasoning, focusing on the only consistent detail reported by multiple witnesses: the repeated appearances of the cream-colored Chevy Bel Air in the time frame close to Emma's disappearance. The first step in this new direction was to extract all registration records for light-colored Bel Airs in New Haven and the nearby Hamden area in 1961. The databases at the time were not as complete as later systems, forcing police to combine sources from the Vehicle Registration Office, tax tracking logs, and lists from dealers who had sold this model in recent years. After hours of screening, they compiled a list of over 36 active vehicle owners in the area, including cases where cars had been resold but paperwork was not updated. The list was grouped by residence location, travel habits, and distance to the Wharton neighborhood to identify owners likely to appear within a 3-block radius at the time of Emma's disappearance. Some owners worked downtown with routes passing through the area, but schedule checks showed they were still at work during the incident, with colleagues confirming their presence. A few others owned the cars, but the vehicles were under repair and immobile that day. Cases with unverifiable schedules were placed on a watch list, but without unusual signs or suspicious histories, priority remained low. In parallel, the team considered the possibility that the Bel Air did not belong to a local resident, but was only temporarily in the area that day, a scenario making it even harder to trace the owner since registration records did not reflect borrowed, rented, or vehicles used by non-owners. When vehicle screening yielded no clear results, the team shifted to another avenue suggested by a few officers. If Emma was taken immediately, with no traces of movement in the area, the child was likely transported out of the city quickly. This led to checking records at Yale New Haven Hospital, the only facility in the area capable of handling newborns or young children needing medical care or emergency adoption processing. Records were requested from the day of the incident, extending 24 hours afterward, focusing on cases of children admitted without clear family information or with requests for birth certificate or adoption processing in a short time. Among these records, the team found one notable case, a baby girl recorded as an emergency adoption newborn with admission time less than an hour after Emma's disappearance. The record listed the adoptive parent as a woman from the Hartford area, and the accompanying birth certificate showed signs of altered handwriting in the date of birth section. However, when cross-referencing age, weight, and the adoptive parent's statement, the record described a newborn supposedly born that day with no matching characteristics to Emma, a 2-year-old. Suspicion about the document's authenticity prompted deeper checks, but verification was hindered by adoption record confidentiality rules and lack of strong legal tools to compel the hospital to provide more details. Some officers suspected possible fraud in the records, but there was no direct evidence proving the hospital child was Emma. The birth certificate itself only showed handwriting irregularities without other grounds, and the adoptive parent explained the rushed submission due to special family circumstances. After weighing all the data, the team concluded that, although both the cream-colored Bel Air and the hospital record were potential leads, there was no verifiable evidence directly linking them to Emma's disappearance. The lack of verified information about the driver, specific description of the strange woman, and inability to deeply check hospital records meant this expanded direction could not progress further, forcing authorities to acknowledge that clues appearing during what was considered the best opportunity window were not strong enough to establish meaningful causal relationships. After weeks of expanding the investigation along the two main directions, tracking the cream-colored Bel Air and checking emergency adoption child records at the hospital, the team had to synthesize all processed clues to assess the viability of continued pursuit. The physical evidence collected at the scene, including small child's footprints, the displaced tricycle and rubber ball positions, and faint roadside tire tracks, all pointed to a common scenario. Emma did not leave the yard on her own, but was taken in a very short time frame. However, none of the evidence was clear enough to directly link to a specific individual or escape route. Witness statements, while consistent on key points like the Bel Air's appearance and the strange woman, lacked detail for identification features or license plate. Recorded timelines also did not fully align due to memory discrepancies and lack of on-site precise timing devices. Investigating suspect Delaney helped eliminate a distracting direction, but did not bring the team closer to the actual perpetrator. Additionally, screening Bel Air owner lists in New Haven and Hamden identified no owners present in the area at the time without clear alibis. Even the hospital record, despite one notable case with irregularities on the birth certificate, showed no actual connection to Emma due to mismatched age and child description. Every investigative direction lacked the verifiable link needed to build a suspect profile. After cross-referencing all data, authorities concluded they had no legal evidence or actionable clues for specific continued pursuit. The most critical traces were limited by 1961 technology and procedures, preventing tire track comparisons, fabric analysis, or biological testing. Near total reliance on witness statements further reduced hypothesis certainty, especially when witnesses could not precisely recall times or physical appearances. With weak clues, scattered data, and no clear convergence point, the New Haven Police Department had to follow standard procedure for missing persons cases with no progress after weeks. The Emma Cooper case file was officially moved to inactive status, meaning the investigation was suspended at the local level and would only be revisited if valuable new information emerged. This decision was noted in the final report, stating there was insufficient evidence to identify the perpetrator, vehicle used, or victim's location. Despite the on-scene team's maximum deployment of search and screening capabilities, limitations in technology, personnel, and timing prevented further progress. When the file was closed, all early efforts, from scene examination, witness statement collection, to vehicle tracing, became the case's sole data foundation, but lacked the breakthrough element needed to sustain active investigation. When the case file in New Haven was shifted to inactive status, The rest of the story continued far from the Wharton neighborhood, where Emma had vanished without a trace. What was later reconstructed shows that on the very afternoon of the incident, Emma was taken out of New Haven in a car heading straight toward Hartford, more than 40 miles away, where Linda Harrow was living in a quiet residential area near Maple Road. Linda, a woman living alone after years of unsuccessful infertility treatments, had an outwardly calm life, but inwardly harbored isolation and an obsession with having a child. Emma's arrival in her home did not happen as a spontaneous act. Details later revealed that Linda had prepared in advance. She had already hidden away several baby items, a set of small-size clothes, a hand-knitted wool blanket, and even handwritten notes with the name Grace that she had likely cherished for a long time before bringing Emma to Hartford. Upon arriving home, Emma, who was terrified and confused after a journey that separated her from her familiar surroundings, was kept by Linda in a locked room at the back of the house, where the windows were covered with thick curtains. In the early days, Emma cried a lot, refused to eat, and instinctively searched for Helen, forcing Linda to use various soothing methods, such as playing soft music, offering new toys, or taking the child to the backyard during hours when few people were around. The identity change began within the first week. Linda had prepared a forged adoption document that she had drafted herself beforehand, and by leveraging a connection with an administrative employee who habitually worked without thorough verification, she registered Emma under a new name. Grace Harrow, born in Hartford, daughter of a mother who died from postpartum complication. No one asked deeper questions, because records in 1961 did not require strict verification for late birth registrations. The name Emma disappeared from the paperwork, and from then on, Linda began calling the child by the new name, fixing the identity she wanted to impose. Emma's life, under the identity of Grace, took place in a tightly controlled environment. Linda avoided taking the child outside, except during rare early mornings or bad weather afternoons, when few people were out. Neighbors occasionally saw her pushing a stroller, but no one suspected anything, as she described Grace as a cousin's child, sent to her for temporary care. Inside the home, Linda established a clear daily routine, set times for meals, sleep, and play. And Emma had to comply to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Although the care appeared attentive on the surface, always providing plenty of food, clothes, and toys, that attentiveness came with constant supervision. As if Linda feared that even a slight relaxation would cause the child to vanish from her, just as she had once lost the chance to have her own biological child. The spaces Emma was allowed to use were limited to just a few rooms, while the front area and other common living spaces were maximally restricted to prevent neighbors from seeing Emma too frequently. As Emma grew older and began exhibiting behaviors that expressed memories from her past, Linda tightened her control even more. Emma often mentioned a yellow house. The Cooper home actually had steps painted pale yellow, or called out a name she couldn't fully recall, usually a sound like hen, when sleepy. Linda responded by redirecting the child to another activity or correcting her words, saying she was confusing it with a storybook character or a distant relative. Nevertheless, the vague memories still surfaced in ways Linda could not completely eliminate. Emma drew pictures of a brown-haired woman hugging her, even though Linda had blonde hair. Emma recognized bird sounds from the Cooper neighborhood that Linda didn't understand. Emma asked for a tricycle that had never existed in the Hartford house. Despite these signs, Emma gradually learned to adjust and adapt to Linda's controlled environment. By age 3, Emma, now Grace, began fluently using the new name and calling Linda Mother, partly out of a need for comfort and partly due to the constant repetition Linda created in daily interactions. Linda did not allow the child to play with neighborhood children or attend preschool in the early years, instead teaching letters and numbers at home with simple materials. This isolation caused memories of her old life to fade further over time. But core details like the color of the Cooper yard, the sound of the living room screen door, or the sensation of someone carrying her across the lawn remained scattered in Emma's memory, appearing as disconnected, foggy images. Linda put great effort into reinforcing her image as a single-parent family. She took photos of Emma on holidays, sent cards announcing Grace is another year older to a few acquaintances in the area, and built a protective narrative around raising Grace Harrow. However, these efforts to conceal and construct a new life were accompanied by constant fear. Linda minimized interactions with authorities, avoided any procedures that might require document verification, and always kept Emma within her control to ensure the past could not return to snatch the child from her grasp. In that environment, Emma grew up with a life that was materially sufficient, but lacking freedom, cared for, yet without meaningful social connections. Although the initial memories faded over the years, they still left subtle traces in her behavior. Emma often flinched at the sound of a car door slamming shut, sometimes cried when hearing someone call Emma on the street. Because it triggered an inexplicably familiar feeling, at times she stared at pale yellow-painted houses while passing by, as if trying to find a missing piece of memory she couldn't name. These signs showed that although the new identity had been successfully imposed in daily life, the part of her memory belonging to Emma Cooper still lay silently beneath the surface of Grace Harrow, existing as a fragmented chain of images not clear enough for her to understand, but strong enough never to be completely erased. By 1975, more than a decade after Emma Cooper's disappearance, the New Haven Police Department conducted a review of several long-standing missing persons cases to assess the potential application of new advancements in criminal investigation techniques, and Emma's case was included due to its unique nature. No body, no traces leading out of the area, and no confirmed suspect. The team handling old files began by re-examining all remaining physical evidence from 1961, but the amount was very limited. They only had crime scene photographs, witness statement transcripts, notes on footprints and item positions, and some soil and fabric samples collected late on the day of the incident. These samples, stored in old archive conditions, had partially lost their integrity, but the technical team still attempted analysis using fiber examination methods and material property comparisons, commonly used in civilian investigations during the 1970s. They re-examined the fabric fibers collected from the front yard area that had been considered suspicious, but the fiber material was too common and lacked unique identifying features. Comparisons with control samples of children's clothing, adult clothing, or common fence materials from that era yielded no results, as the fibers were too small, worn, and only showed synthetic cotton composition typical of mass-produced garments. Additionally, soil from the curb area was reanalyzed under a basic microscope, but it did not differ significantly from general neighborhood soil samples, so it could not be used to determine vehicle type or direction of travel. Blurry tire track photographs were enlarged, but the technology of the time did not allow precise matching to tire patterns, as the distance between tracks was unclear and there was no distinct tread pattern to trace back to a brand or model. The next step for the investigation team was to consider gathering supplemental statements from old witnesses. After 14 years, the memories of residents in the 3 blocks around the Cooper home had faded considerably. When officers knocked on doors of key witnesses like Mrs. Doyle or the mail carrier, who had seen a strange woman, they only recalled vague details: the sound of a car door closing, the feeling of a slow-moving vehicle, an impression of a woman that afternoon. However, they could not provide important new details about appearance, license plate, posture, or direction of movement. Some witnesses who were young in 1961 had since moved away or could not be located. The newly collected statements did not differ much from the originals and were even less accurate due to the passage of time, resulting in no improvement in the reliability of any leads in the file. The investigation team also tried realigning the entire timeline based on remaining records, but the initial inconsistencies and data gaps between statements prevented them from reconstructing the sequence of events with greater accuracy than the first time. Memory discrepancies among witnesses, which were minor in 1961, had now grown so large that they could not be used to narrow the time frame of Emma's abduction. The technical advancements of 1975, though improved over 1961, were still too limited for genetic analysis, advanced chemical identification, or microscopic matching. With only basic optical methods and material analysis, the retained samples did not contain enough information to pursue any new investigative direction. After compiling all re-examination results and supplemental statements, the case review team concluded that the Emma Cooper case had no basis for expanding the investigation or elevating it to a higher pursuit level. The complete lack of physical evidence identifying a perpetrator, related vehicle, or escape route meant all hypotheses remained at the speculative level and could not be turned into legal action. The final report from the 1975 review stated clearly, no new data sufficient to reopen the investigation. The file will continue to maintain inactive status until verifiable evidence or testimony emerges. By 1989, as crime investigation technology made new strides and many police departments nationwide began re-examining missing persons cases spanning decades, the Emma Cooper file was once again evaluated. Unlike in 1975, this review focused on two new approaches, applying age progression imaging techniques to aid identification and searching adoption records across New England for the possibility that Emma had reappeared under a different identity. Forensic artists used photographs of Emma at age 2, combined with anthropometric features from Helen and Martin Cooper, then simulated changes across developmental stages to produce renderings of Emma at age 30. The result was a series of composite portraits showing various possibilities for facial shape, jaw width, hair color, and demeanor, intended for comparison with adoption records or reports of abandoned children from prior years. These sketches were created in multiple versions to account for natural variation in growth, but even though 1989 age progression techniques were more advanced than earlier periods, they remained highly speculative and were mainly used for elimination rather than confirmation. The next step for investigators was to review adoption records across a broader area, including Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire. The goal was to find cases of children registered for adoption between 1961 and 1963 where records showed irregularities in birth date, lacked traces of biological parents, or involved informal channels. Many such records had been lost or incompletely stored due to lax regulations in the early 1960s. But investigators still compiled a list of families with information that did not fully match between birth certificates and adoption declarations. The most notable was a case in Rhode Island, where a family reported adopting a girl in November 1961, close to the time of Emma's disappearance. That file lacked the birth hospital name and had edits in the birth mother's occupation field. When comparing the age-progressed portrait to personal photos of the woman adopted that year, the team noted some similarities, particularly in cheekbone structure and hairline. This led to the case being prioritized for verification. However, during direct interviews and medical record checks, police discovered a genuine birth certificate issued at a small hospital in Massachusetts, not Yale, New Haven as initially suspected. The Massachusetts hospital confirmed records of a newborn registered that day, and while the family's file had some inconsistent entries due to administrative errors, it showed no signs of forgery. Additionally, the woman's blood type did not match the recorded blood type of Emma before her disappearance, allowing investigators to fully rule out this case. Handling the Rhode Island lead took several weeks and illustrated how reviewing adoption families could be significantly time-consuming, especially since most 1960s records were not stored to uniform state standards. Expanding the search to other areas yielded no better results. Most adopted children had clear evidence of biological origin or verifiable identity through living relatives. Very few records had enough ambiguity to be considered suspicious, and in those rare cases, verification showed no specific link to Emma. The overall results showed no individual on the adoption list matching age data, biological characteristics, or composite portraits. After months of evaluation and information gathering, the 1989 investigation team concluded that despite enhanced sketching tools for identification, they still lacked sufficient evidence to reopen the file in any actionable direction. The new data only created theoretical possibilities that could not be turned into practical leads. The extended time frame, lack of physical evidence, absence of new witnesses, and technological limitations of the era kept the case in deadlock. Therefore, the Emma Cooper file was officially classified as a long-term cold case in the state of Connecticut, marking more than 2 decades without any significant progress in determining Emma's whereabouts or the identity of the person who took her from the Wharton neighborhood in 1961. In 2004, more than 4 decades after the day Emma Cooper disappeared from her front yard in New Haven, her life under the identity of Grace Harrow entered a phase involving more administrative procedures as Grace prepared to change jobs and was required to complete a new health insurance application. The insurance company, in accordance with regulations at the time, applied a biometric identity verification process for cases where birth certificates had been reissued or showed signs of alteration. And Grace's records fell into this category because her date of birth had been updated in the 1960s based on a guardian's declaration without accompanying hospital certification. This required Grace to undergo a standard DNA test to confirm biological relation to the person listed as her legal mother in the records, Linda Harrow. This was originally just a routine procedure to support the creation of the insurance file, but when Grace received the request, she felt unfamiliar with it, partly because she had never considered the possibility that her documents might have issues, and partly because the vague childhood memories had never been explained by her. Linda, who was elderly and in declining health, did not object to the test but appeared more anxious than usual. She agreed to provide a DNA sample, thinking it was merely a simple administrative process, unaware that the test would produce an unchangeable result. When the samples from both were sent to the laboratory, Grace did not think much of it, but when the results were forwarded to the insurance company and simultaneously reported back to her, the matter immediately went beyond the scope of an administrative procedure. The test results clearly concluded there was no biological relation whatsoever between Grace Harrow and Linda Harrow. The DNA similarity level was near 0, completely ruling out the possibility that Linda was the biological mother or a direct relative. This result forced the insurance company to transfer the file to the Special Review Department and simultaneously send a notification to the Connecticut Department of Health, which was responsible for verifying birth records showing signs of discrepancy. Within a few days, the information was forwarded to law enforcement because DNA discrepancies related to birth certificates could indicate an illegal adoption or, in more serious cases, a kidnapping. From there, Grace's records were automatically cross-referenced with the missing children database that had existed since the late 1980s, in which many long-term missing persons cases had been digitized to serve modern biometric comparisons. This database included anthropometric parameters, DNA samples from surviving relatives, image data, and descriptive records of missing children from decades earlier. When Grace's DNA sample was entered into the system, the matching algorithms immediately performed an automatic scan across thousands of old records. Among them, one record stood out due to a genetic compatibility level exceeding 99%. The record of Emma Cooper, the 2-year-old girl who disappeared in 1961 in New Haven. This match, scientifically speaking, was strong enough to confirm that Grace Harrow was Emma Cooper. The discovery of the DNA match activated the internal protocol of the Connecticut State Police, in which long-term missing persons cases with new developments would be transferred to the Connecticut Cold Case Unit, the division specializing in unresolved cases. The investigator in charge of the missing children database immediately sent a detailed report to the Cold Case Unit, including the DNA analysis, the sample receipt date, and the discrepancies in Grace's birth records. The analysis section stated clearly, the DNA sample matches at the level of genetic compatibility of a biological child with biological parents. There are no discrepancies sufficient to create identification error. Cross-referencing the Cooper file shows that Emma Cooper is the biological child of Helen and Martin Cooper. The subject, Grace Harrow, exhibits matching biological characteristics and becomes the sole candidate for the Emma case. When the report reached the office of the Connecticut Cold Case Unit, the case was immediately classified as the highest priority. Experienced investigators in the field of delayed identification were assigned to handle the file, in which they reviewed from the beginning all data collected from 1961, Emma's disappearance in under 2 minutes, the insufficient physical evidence, statements about the cream-colored Bel Air, the appearance of the strange woman, and the investigative direction toward Yale, New Haven Hospital. Each piece of old data was placed alongside the new DNA results, forming a logical chain different from the initial vague assumptions. In the analysis process, one notable point was recorded. Grace Harrow's self-declared adoption records from November 1961 showed many signs of temporal overlap with Emma's disappearance, including the issuance date, the guardian's name, and the lack of hospital birth information. These signs, previously overlooked due to the legal limitations of that era, were now examined in the light of DNA evidence. The Cold Case Unit immediately placed the Emma Cooper file in the priority reinvestigation category, marking a significant shift from a disappearance with no leads for over 40 years to one with authenticated scientific evidence indicating that the victim was still alive under a different identity. When Grace was informed that her DNA did not match the person she had believed to be her mother for over 40 years, she entered a period of profound upheaval that the investigative team had to approach with caution. However, this information, along with the fact that her DNA sample matched perfectly with the Cooper family records, created the most important turning point since 1961. The case now had irrefutable evidence that Emma Cooper was still alive and had lived for many years in a family with no biological relation. With the DNA cross-match results and the overlapping suspicious points in the 1961 adoption records, the Emma Cooper case file was officially reactivated and fully transferred to the Connecticut Cold Case Unit to begin the reinvestigation phase on a foundation of technology and data that the forces in 1961, 1975, and 1989 could not access. Immediately after the Emma Cooper file was reactivated, based on the DNA results from Grace Harrow, the Connecticut Cold Case Unit began implementing a comprehensive review, reopening all documents created in 1961 and cross-referencing them with newly collected data. The first step focused on the Yale, New Haven Hospital records, where a previous emergency adoption case had coincided with the time of Emma's disappearance but could not be verified due to technological and investigative authority limitations. In this review, the team requested access to all newborn registration logs, administrative staff duty records, and original birth certificate forms within the 3-day period surrounding Emma's disappearance. When these records were digitized for analysis, a notable detail emerged. The birth certificate for Grace Harrow, stored by the hospital, was not actually a certificate signed by a doctor, but an externally submitted birth declaration form bearing the signature of an administrative employee who, according to personnel records, had once been reprimanded for improper document handling. This form lacked an accompanying hospital file number, did not record the duty nurse's name, and had no batch codes for medications or medical notes, items that by 1961 most hospitals in Connecticut had begun requiring. When comparing signatures, the team noticed that the signature on Grace Harrow's birth certificate resembled signatures in a few other records from the same month, but did not match the standard signature of the signer in the administrative roster. This suggested the possibility that the signature had been written on behalf of someone or created under lax verification conditions. Next, the timeline in the records also showed abnormalities. According to the documents submitted in 1961, Grace was recorded as born in Hartford, and the file was submitted on the same day, but the registry intake log only recorded it the following day, with the receipt stamp altered using different ink. These minor discrepancies, which might have been overlooked in a less regulated era, now became crucial links because they fit the scenario of Emma being taken from New Haven and having adoption records created within hours. The investigation was pushed further when the team accessed Linda Harrow's vehicle records from 1963. They discovered she had owned a cream-colored Chevrolet Bel Air, registered in Hartford, in late 1959. This alone did not prove involvement, but when technical experts compared the wheelbase in Linda's Bel Air records with the blurred tire marks photographed in 1961, the results showed the distances fell within the compatible range for her vehicle model. Although the tire marks were not clear enough to identify the tread pattern, the wheelbase match increased the likelihood that Linda's car had been present in the Cooper neighborhood at the time of Emma's disappearance. From there, the investigative team shifted focus to reviewing Linda's residential history and social network. They tracked down individuals who lived near her in 1961 to verify if anyone had seen Linda appear with a child around the time of the disappearance. Many former residents in the Hartford area were contacted, including one neighbor who lived next to Linda that year and recalled that she had suddenly appeared with a little girl around late fall 1961. When asked, Linda only said the child was a cousin sent to her for temporary care. This neighbor also noted that Linda rarely let the child go outside and always avoided questions about the child's family. Another person in the area remembered Linda saying she had adopted the child but did not want to discuss it further due to personal circumstances. These accounts, though not sufficient for direct conclusion, aligned with the timing and characteristics of Emma's removal, a 2-year-old girl appearing suddenly, without formal introduction, and raised in a closed environment. With the data gathered from old neighbors, hospital records, and vehicle ownership history, the team began reconstructing a new timeline for Linda's activities during Emma's disappearance. According to this, Linda left her home in Hartford that morning, possibly driving to New Haven in her personal vehicle. If Linda appeared in the Wharton neighborhood in the early afternoon, the travel time fully aligned with approaching Emma in the 2 minutes her mother was distracted and quickly leaving the scene before anyone could notice the disturbance. To solidify this timeline, the team rechecked shopping data, invoices, and bank records, but most of these had been lost over time or were no longer retained, making verification of Linda's movements on the day of the incident rely entirely on neighbor accounts and the coincidence between her vehicle model and the 1961 blurred tire marks. However, the key evidence remained Grace, Emma's DNA results, evidence that did not exist in prior investigation. When the DNA results were incorporated into legal analysis, the team determined that Emma's appearance in Hartford, under the identity of Grace, was almost certainly directly linked to Linda. This, combined with the chain of discrepancies in the birth certificate and the vehicle match, allowed them to meet the legal conditions to request a search warrant. Before finalizing the application for arrest and search warrants, police continued interviewing individuals who had indirect contact with Linda from 1961-1965. One person who worked part-time at the administrative office, where Grace's birth certificate was submitted, recalled that Linda appeared very tense when filing the documents and gave only brief answers when asked about the child's birthplace. This person also remembered that some of Linda's documents lacked information but were still accepted due to the lax procedures of the time. The team recorded this statement and included it in the file to demonstrate that Linda had the opportunity and reasonable motive to exploit administrative loopholes to legitimize bringing a child who was not hers into her care. When all the new data was compiled and consistently linked, from abnormalities in hospital records, signature discrepancies on the birth certificate, the Bel Air ownership history matching tire marks, neighbor statements about the sudden appearance of a little girl in 1961, to the DNA results confirming Grace was Emma. The team immediately completed the court submission for a search warrant on Linda Harrow's residence, a seizure order for all related documents, and an arrest warrant for her on charges related to the 1961 disappearance. This was the first time in over 4 decades that a sufficiently strong evidentiary system had been established, allowing the case to move out of speculation and into the phase of actual action. As soon as the arrest warrant was approved, Linda Harrow was taken into custody, and the first interrogation took place in the interview room of the Connecticut Cold Case Unit, where investigators focused on clarifying the motive, sequence of actions, and degree of intent in taking Emma from New Haven that year. Linda appeared tired, neither resisting nor volunteering information, only anxiously asking about Grace's condition, whom she still considered her daughter. When the investigators presented the DNA results, Linda remained silent for a long time before admitting that Grace was not her biological child and that she had taken Emma from the Wharton neighborhood that afternoon. This confirmation opened a series of statements carefully recorded to cross-reference with physical evidence and data re-evaluated over the previous months. When asked about the motive, Linda said that in 1961, she had endured years of failed infertility treatments and had just gone through a broken marriage. These events left her in prolonged isolation and developed an intense obsession with having a child to care for. She admitted to frequently driving through residential areas in the afternoons just to see children playing in yards, and the Wharton neighborhood was one she passed through multiple times. According to Linda, seeing Emma, a 2-year-old child playing alone near the edge of the yard, triggered an abnormal impulse that she described as irrational but too strong to resist. When investigators requested a detailed description of the events that day, Linda said she had driven the Bel Air from Hartford to New Haven in the early afternoon, stopping in several other neighborhoods before entering the Cooper area. This statement was cross-checked with the timeline the team had built from old neighbor accounts. Both Hartford neighbors and New Haven witnesses remembered Linda not being home that morning when Emma disappeared, consistent with her driving out of the city. Upon reaching the Wharton area, Linda described observing Emma and Helen from a distance, seeing Helen go inside and Emma continue playing near the grass. She parked at the curb, turned off the engine to avoid attention, then got out and quickly approached the child. According to the statement, Emma did not have time to react or cry out because Linda picked her up very quickly, covering the child's head with her coat sleeve to avoid being seen from windows. As she returned to the car, she heard a door slam, a sound matching Mrs. Doyle's 1961 statement, then immediately left the neighborhood toward Townsend Road and drove straight back to Hartford. When cross-referencing this statement with the position of the blurred tire marks in the 1961 crime scene photos, the team confirmed that Linda's described parking position matched the wheelbase imprint in the enlarged photo. This reinforced the likelihood that Linda's Bel Air had indeed been present in the area. When asked about the birth certificate, Linda admitted submitting the file in Hartford in a state of panic. Fearing someone would trace the child's true origin, she confirmed falsifying the birth date and place, using partially copied information from a notebook, and admitting to asking a familiar employee in the administrative office to process the file quickly, exploiting the verification gaps of the time. This explained the inconsistencies in signatures and stamp dates that the team had noted. When asked why she never returned Emma to the Cooper family, Linda offered no clear reason beyond fear and inability to let go, describing that after just a few days caring for the child, she felt returning her was something she could not face. When the investigator shifted to the process of caring for Emma after bringing her to Hartford, Linda provided many details matching data previously gathered from old neighbors. She kept Emma indoors most of the time, avoided outside contact, did not send the child to daycare, and always told others the child was a cousin sent temporarily. One neighbor remembered seeing Emma in the backyard, but never carried out front, which Linda confirmed, saying she always avoided letting the child be seen by strangers. The investigators also asked Linda to describe Emma's clothing on the day she was taken for cross-reference with the 1961 report. Linda described Emma wearing a light-colored top and holding a small round toy, a description matching the rubber ball found displaced on the grass. The alignment between the statement and physical evidence, even in small details, was considered important evidence, helping authorities confirm Linda was actually at the scene. When asked about the initial hours in Hartford, Linda provided further information about Emma's psychological state upon arrival, saying the child was terrified, cried a lot, and called out sounds resembling someone's name, details consistent with prior assessments that Emma still remembered her family in the early period of being held at Linda's home. This information helped investigators supplement emotional and behavioral data to reconstruct events immediately after Emma was taken from New Haven. At the end of the interrogation, Linda also described the escape route from the Wharton neighborhood, saying she did not turn the car around, but continued straight through intersections, avoiding main roads to minimize attention. This aligned with the 1961 hypothesis that Emma was taken by car in a very short time, making large-scale searches unable to determine the direction of travel. When compiling the entire statement, authorities found it aligned with nearly all re-evaluated physical evidence: the tire marks at the scene, the unusual appearance of a cream-colored Bel Air, the falsified birth certificate status, Hartford neighbors' accounts of a little girl's sudden appearance with Linda, and ultimately, the fact that Grace Harrow was in fact Emma Cooper, as confirmed by DNA. These details allowed the team to complete the dataset for reconstructing the 1961 scene and solidify evidence for charges against Linda Harrow for taking Emma from the Cooper family 43 years earlier. Based on Linda Harrow's confession along with all the physical evidence and witness data collected from 1961, the Connecticut Cold Case Unit began reconstructing the detailed sequence of the abduction to determine the accuracy of the confession, the logical consistency of the timelines, and the feasibility of carrying out the actions in the brief period during which Emma disappeared. The reconstruction process started by cross-referencing the moment Helen turned her eyes away from Emma with the time frame Linda described for arriving in the Wharton neighborhood. According to Helen's 1961 statement, she went inside from the yard for less than 2 minutes to get a towel, and during that time, Emma was still playing near the edge of the lawn. Linda's 2004 confession stated that she drove into the Wharton area in the early afternoon, parked at the curb in front of the Cooper house, observed Emma for a few seconds before getting out of the car. Investigators rebuilt this time frame using on-site simulations, estimating the time Linda would need to pull over, turn off the engine, exit the vehicle, approach Emma, pick her up, and return to the car. The entire sequence of actions, when tested under similar conditions, took between 18 and 30 seconds, depending on the speed of movement, fully consistent with the period when Helen was not watching Emma. This reinforced the hypothesis that Linda's approach was executed quickly, efficiently, and with minimal noise, causing neighbors to hear only the sound of the car door closing without having time to observe the rest of the events. After reconstructing the approach to Emma, the investigative team proceeded to verify Linda's parking position by comparing the faint tire marks photographed at the 1961 crime scene with the wheelbase specifications of the Bel Air that Linda had owned. The distance between the two tire tracks in the photo, though blurred due to subsequent resident traffic, was sufficient to determine that the marks belonged to a vehicle with a wheelbase in the common range for late 1957 Bel Air models. While it could not be conclusively proven that the tire marks were from Linda's car, this match strongly supported the possibility that her vehicle had been present exactly at the spot where witnesses heard the door close. Investigators used measuring tape and wheelbase reference points to recreate the vehicle's parking position. The results showed that the car could have been parked right at the edge of the yard, close enough for an adult to quickly step onto the lawn and reach Emma in just a few strides. Next, they reconstructed the act of picking up Emma and placing her in the car. According to Linda's confession, the child had no time to react or cry out because the action happened so fast. The 1961 crime scene data showed that the tricycle and ball were displaced toward the curb, consistent with the possibility that Emma was lifted while her hands were still holding or touching the toys. During the reconstruction, the team confirmed that if Emma was lifted off the ground while in a playing position, the tricycle would be pushed aside in exactly the position documented in the photos from that year. The absence of any further footprints from Emma after reaching the curb also aligned with the scenario that she was picked up rather than walking on her own. After Emma was placed in the car, the investigative team reconstructed the escape route from the Wharton area based on 1961 street maps and Linda's statement that she avoided main roads to avoid attention. A route simulation showed a high likelihood that Linda made a U-turn toward Townsend Road, took a series of quiet residential streets with little traffic, and then merged onto the main road toward Hartford. The travel time from Wharton to Hartford in afternoon conditions without congestion matched the time frame that Hartford neighbors recalled Linda returning with a new little girl in the late afternoon that day. To increase the accuracy of the reconstructed route, investigators also cross-referenced 1961 traffic maps, including roads that had since changed or no longer existed. The results indicated that at the time of the incident, there was a secondary road connecting Wharton to a low-traffic stretch, reducing the chance of being spotted by witnesses. When this route was applied to the simulation, travel time was shortened by a few minutes, but still remained within a reasonable window that allowed Linda to remove Emma from the scene without being seen. Data also showed that if Linda left the area within 1 minute of the car door closing sound being heard, the search party and Cooper neighbors would not have been able to see her vehicle due to the house corner and fence, partially obstructing the view of the route. This aligned with the fact that no witnesses recalled seeing the Bel Air leave the street, even though several had noted its presence before the disappearance. Finally, the investigative team cross-referenced all the timelines obtained from the 1961 statements, Linda's confession, reconstruction results, and Hartford neighbor data to create a complete chronology. Linda left Hartford in the morning, appeared in the Wharton area in the early afternoon, parked during the moments. Helen looked away from Emma, approached the child in a matter of seconds, departed via low-traffic routes, and returned to Hartford within the time frame witnesses remembered as early evening. This timeline, when compared to the only highly certain data, the DNA results confirming Grace was Emma, allowed the investigative unit to conclude that the scenario of Linda approaching and taking Emma from the Cooper home in 1961 had been reasonably reconstructed, consistent with all evidence, and free of internal contradictions. This reconstruction simultaneously strengthened the legal basis for asserting that Linda had intentionally committed the abduction, while Emma was only a few steps from her mother, capitalizing on the brief moment of inattention and choosing an escape route calculated to minimize any chance of detection during the most critical phase of the incident. After the 1961 sequence reconstruction was completed, and Linda Harrow's confession matched the entire chain of re-verified evidence, the Connecticut Cold Case Unit moved to the final step in legal identification, comparing Emma Cooper's identity with Grace Harrow through expanded DNA testing and two-way confirmation with the Cooper family. Grace's DNA sample, previously analyzed during an insurance process, was retested under full forensic protocols to ensure accuracy, while an additional reference sample was taken from Helen Cooper, the only surviving biological mother. The forensic team conducted a comparison of the entire genetic marker sequence, including less variable segments, to rule out any random coincidence. The results confirmed a compatibility level far exceeding the standard threshold for establishing a mother-child relationship, solidifying the conclusion that Grace Harrow was Emma Cooper. Following the scientific results, the next step was administrative verification, cross-referencing old birth records, Cooper family hospital records, Grace's personal documents and materials seized from Linda's home. All pointed in the same direction. Emma Cooper had lived under the identity of Grace Harrow for over 40 years. Once verification was complete, the investigative unit coordinated with victim support services to prepare conditions for notification and organizing the reunion between the Cooper family and Emma. Because this was a special case, a missing person found after decades who had lived an entirely different life, psychological preparation, and a safe environment were mandatory requirements. Specialists were assigned to support Emma, helping her process the information gradually without shock, while also assisting Helen in preparing to meet the daughter she had searched for nearly half a century. Before the official meeting, Emma was provided with documents about the 1961 disappearance, including photos of herself at age 2, images of the Cooper family, initial investigative papers, and detailed explanations of the discrepancies in the birth records. This information was presented step by step to help Emma build a stable awareness of how her true identity had been concealed. Concurrently, Helen Cooper, now an elderly woman with declining health, was supported in reacquainting herself with long-dormant information. She was shown the DNA results and an investigative summary to ensure the reunion would occur on a completely clear and safe basis. To prepare a suitable location, the cold case unit arranged a private interview room at the state police headquarters, isolated from general activity areas to ensure privacy. The meeting room was set up minimally, with only tables, chairs, and an area for psychological support staff to stand ready outside in case either party became emotionally overwhelmed. On the day of the reunion, Emma arrived at headquarters, accompanied by a support worker, while Helen was brought into the room first to settle her nerves. When Emma entered, Helen did not recognize her immediately due to the changes time had wrought on her features, but the similarity in their eyes made her instantly realize that the person standing before her was the child she had lost, under circumstances no one could have foreseen. The meeting was not dramatic or ceremonial, but rather a formal identity confirmation process presided over by a cold case unit representative. The investigator presented the DNA results again, cross-referenced records, and confirmed that legally, Emma Cooper was considered found and no longer listed as missing. A new identity acknowledgement form was provided for Emma to sign, confirming she had read and understood the legal process related to restoring her true identity. During this meeting, Helen was given copies of the comparison results, and Emma received copies of the original birth certificate that the Cooper family had preserved for decades. The reunion unfolded mostly in silence because words became unnecessary once the truth was finally clear. The authorities certified this meeting as an important administrative milestone. The moment Emma Cooper, missing since 1961, was confirmed to have survived and officially returned under her true identity. The reunion also established the final missing link in the case file. The victim had been located, and legal identity confirmation closed a significant chapter in resolving a case that had spanned more than 4 decades. Immediately following the official identity confirmation, legal proceedings against Linda Harrow were initiated under regulations applicable to child abductions exceeding state jurisdiction, particularly when the victim was taken across internal state administrative boundaries and lived under a false identity for decades. Federal charges were filed based on the 1961 abduction, the use of forged documents to create a new identity for the child, and concealing the victim from authorities for over 40 years. Despite the passage of time, federal kidnapping statutes have no statute of limitations when the victim is alive, so Linda faced serious charges, including obstruction of justice and document fraud. In initial hearings, defense counsel referenced Linda's poor health and advanced age, but this did not alter the nature of the case. She had deliberately taken a child from her legal family and maintained the concealment for decades. While legal proceedings against Linda continued, authorities focused on assessing the psychological impact on Emma, who had now lived over 40 years as Grace Harrow. Emma had to confront a truth that completely upended the foundation of her life. None of the childhood memories she knew matched her true identity, and the person she had believed to be her mother for many years was the one who had separated her from her biological family. Psychological specialists evaluated Emma's condition as showing a form of identity disorder, typical in individuals raised long-term in an alternate environment without knowledge of their true origins. Facing 2 family systems, one bonded over 4 decades, the other existing only in vague memories from age 2, caused Emma to experience prolonged emotional conflict. She required multiple sessions with the support team to sort through her feelings: attachment, gratitude, pain, and betrayal toward Linda. Confusion, estrangement, but also remorse and compassion for the Cooper family. Concurrent with psychological support, Connecticut state legal agencies had to handle a series of procedures related to restoring Emma's true identity. This included amending birth records, updating her social security number, invalidating all documents tied to the Grace Harrow identity, while preserving the validity of life records such as education, employment, and medical history that Emma had accumulated. The process required coordination among family court, health department, immigration services, and civil records agencies to ensure Emma lost no legal rights during the identity transition. The court also issued a ruling recognizing her legal name again as Emma Cooper, clearly noting that the Grace Harrow identity had been formed on forged documents and did not reflect the victim's true status. After her identity was restored, Emma began the process of reintegrating with the Cooper family, a process that was not sudden but progressed gradually to avoid causing mental harm to either side. Helen, though deeply moved during the initial reunion, was guided by specialists on how to reconnect with Emma without pressure or excessive expectations. Emma, while trying to understand her own history anew, approached the Cooper family with the natural caution of an adult resuming a relationship interrupted for nearly 43 years. Initial meetings were kept short, mainly for Emma and Helen to grow accustomed to each other's presence, review old photos, and share small details about the lives each had missed. Gradually, the distance between them narrowed as Emma began recognizing familiar traits in Helen's voice, eyes, and the way she described memories of her. From the Cooper side, other relatives were introduced step by step to avoid overwhelming Emma with new information and relationships. Authorities also assisted Emma in reacquainting herself with her old hometown environment through guided visits to the Wharton neighborhood where she once lived, but always at her own choice to ensure no triggering of negative memories. Concurrently, Linda's prosecution caused Emma to go through a period of intense internal conflict. Though she knew Linda's actions were illegal and had deprived her of her biological family, Emma could not deny that Linda had raised her for 4 decades. These conflicting emotions were noted by specialists as a natural response for a victim who developed in a long-term bonded environment with the perpetrator. Emma needed time to adjust her perspective, separating legal truth from the human relationship she had lived her entire life. The reintegration process was therefore not just reuniting with the Cooper family, but also Emma learning to re-examine herself from roots, memories, to the newly restored identity. During this phase, authorities noted that Emma showed steady progress. She maintained regular contact with the Cooper family, participated in long-term psychological support sessions, and began building a solid awareness of her true identity without completely losing the life experiences accumulated over 40 years as Grace Harrow. Although the Emma Cooper case reached a conclusion regarding the identity and legal responsibility of Linda Harrow, many important questions remain unverifiable due to the long passage of time and the inherent limitations of investigative technology in 1961. By the time the file was closed, authorities were still unable to definitively determine whether Linda had any accomplices. It was feasible for Linda to drive alone from Hartford to New Haven, approach Emma in just a few dozen seconds, and leave the area without being detected. But some investigators continued to question whether someone in Linda's network of acquaintances knew about or assisted her in forging the birth certificate and maintaining the concealment over many years. However, since the administrative clerk who signed the birth certificate had passed away and no internal records remained regarding the processing of the application that day, the question of the exact origin of the forged birth certificate will forever remain unanswered. The limitations in the 1961 investigative records also left many gaps that could not be filled. The faint tire tracks were not clear enough to identify the tire pattern. Fabric samples were lost or no longer intact. Errors in recording timelines and the lack of comprehensive photography meant that reconstructing the scene relied more on inference than on physical evidence. Forensic technology at that time lacked the ability to analyze DNA. There was no national database of missing children and no electronic information storage system to connect disparate clues. Had these technologies existed in 1961, Emma would likely have been found much sooner, and Linda would have found it far more difficult to conceal her actions for so long. When evaluating the overall investigative process that spanned more than 4 decades, it is clear that the system only made significant progress when DNA became a common tool for identity verification. DNA evidence completely transformed the direction of an investigation that had been stalled for years, linking an adult living under a false identity to the record of a child missing since the 1960s. Without this technology, the case would very likely have remained on the cold case list indefinitely. The development of the missing children database and the digitization of archived records also played a crucial role, allowing decades of files to be cross-referenced in a single scan, something that previously required months of manual review. From a societal perspective, the Emma Cooper case carries profound significance because it exposed administrative vulnerabilities that existed in the child adoption system in Connecticut and New England during the 1960s. When many procedures did not require cross-verification between hospitals, health departments, and vital records offices. It was precisely these vulnerabilities that enabled Linda to legitimize her raising of Emma with a forged birth certificate without detection for many years. After the case was resolved, state authorities reviewed record-keeping procedures, standardized identity verification regulations, and implemented stricter controls over the issuance of birth certificates and the processing of adoption applications. For the community, the case serves as a reminder of the fragility of moments of inattention and the critical role of witnesses and physical evidence in the golden hour of any missing person investigation. It also demonstrates that even cases thought to be unsolvable forever can be reopened by scientific advances, particularly DNA, which can unlock doors seemingly closed for good. For the Connecticut investigative forces, the Emma Cooper case is a clear testament to the value of preserving records, digitizing data, and continually reviewing unsolved cases, because sometimes a single new piece of information, such as a DNA test performed inadvertently for administrative reasons, can completely alter the course of a case that has dragged on for over 40 years. The story of Emma Cooper, a child who vanished in a 2-minute gap right in front of her own home, reminds us that even the safest communities in the United States are not immune to risk, especially for young children. The fact that Emma was taken by Linda Harrow in a mere moment of distraction, combined with the fleeting appearance of a cream-colored Bel Air that neighbors only vaguely recalled, highlights how fragile societal protections can be when community trust is high, but oversight measures are insufficient. In today's context, where children frequently play outside, participate in community activities, or spend time in front of their homes, American parents can draw practical lessons from this story. No moment is truly absolutely safe, and consistent vigilance is more important than the familiar sense of peace in the neighborhood. Additionally, the way the 1961 investigation stalled, due to lack of technology, incomplete documentation, and delays in processing clues, such as faded tire tracks or overlooked fabric samples, underscores the importance of timely reporting and accurate information preservation in today's communities. Citizens can assist authorities by noting license plates, describing unusual strangers, or using smart home devices to provide additional data when needed. Finally, the 2004 DNA breakthrough, which began with what seemed like a routine insurance-related test, reminds us that modern technology can resolve cases once considered hopeless. This encourages individuals to proactively update medical records, store family DNA profiles, and be ready to cooperate when authorities need comparisons. Emma's story is not only a reminder of loss, but also proof of the power of a vigilant community, modern technology, and the belief that justice may arrive late, but never truly disappears. Thank you for joining us on this journey to reopen a case that seemed forgotten for over 4 decades. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories where the truth sometimes emerges from the most unexpected places.